She was 19 years old when she dropped out of Stanford to change the world. By 30, she was worth $9 billion, the youngest female self-made billionaire in history. Every major magazine put her on the cover. Rupert Murdoch invested $125 million. The US military used her technology in the field. There was just one problem. The technology didn't work. It had never worked. And Elizabeth Holmes knew it. Today's story is about Silicon Valley's greatest con. Not crypto, not Wall Street. A blood test. A tiny drop of blood from your finger that could detect cancer, diabetes, HIV, hundreds of diseases, faster and cheaper than any lab in the world. It was the most exciting medical breakthrough in decades. It was also completely fake. And the woman who invented it fooled everyone. Presidents, generals, billionaires for over a decade. Elizabeth Ann Holmes was born on February 3, 1984, in Washington, D.C. Her family was established. Her great-great-grandfather had founded a medical company called Fleischmann's Yeast. From a very young age, Elizabeth Holmes had one obsession. She was terrified of needles. Not just uncomfortable, genuinely deeply afraid. And from that fear, she built a vision. What if blood tests didn't require needles? What if a single drop from a fingertip could tell you everything about your health? At 19, she enrolled at Stanford University to study chemical engineering. One semester in, she walked into the office of her professor and told him her idea. He encouraged her. She dropped out, used her Stanford tuition money to found a company. She called it Theranos, a combination of therapy and diagnosis. She was 19 years old. She had no medical degree, no scientific background beyond one semester. But she had something more powerful than any degree. She could make people believe. Theranos raised its first funding in 2004. Then more. And more. By 2014, Theranos had raised over $700 million from some of the most prominent investors in America. The device at the center of everything was called the Edison. Holmes claimed it could run over 200 blood tests from a single drop of blood in under an hour for a fraction of the cost of conventional labs. It was, on paper, revolutionary. There was one problem that Holmes never told investors. The Edison could only reliably perform a handful of basic tests. For everything else, Theranos was secretly using conventional laboratory machines, the same machines made by Siemens and other companies that every other lab in the world used. And even those results were often inaccurate. Theranos lab directors, scientists who knew the truth, raised concerns internally. Holmes overrode them. Lab results showing dangerously high potassium levels, suggesting heart failure, were sent to patients who were completely healthy. Results showing HIV, sent to patients who didn't have it. One patient received test results suggesting she might have a miscarriage and spent days in terror before discovering the results were wrong. Real people, real fear, based on completely inaccurate results. And Theranos kept operating. How did Elizabeth Holmes fool so many powerful people? The answer is a masterclass in manipulation. She wore a black turtleneck every single day, deliberately. She had studied Steve Jobs. She adopted his aesthetic, his mystique, his storytelling. She spoke in a deep, deliberate voice that some former colleagues later suggested was artificially affected. She built a board of directors unlike any startup in Silicon Valley history. George Shultz, former Secretary of State. James Mattis, former U.S. Marine Corps General. Henry Kissinger, former National Security Advisor. William Perry, former Secretary of Defense. These were not tech investors. These were the most respected names in American public life. And Holmes used them as shields. When investors asked about the technology, she pointed to the board. Would these men be here if this wasn't real? Rupert Murdoch invested $125 million. The Walton family, founders of Walmart, invested. The DeVos family invested. Walgreens signed a deal to put Theranos testing centers in their stores across America. By 2015, Theranos was valued at $9 billion. Elizabeth Holmes was on the cover of Fortune, Forbes, and Time. Nobody asked the right questions. Nobody looked closely enough. Until one person did. His name was John Carreyrou, a reporter at the Wall Street Journal. In 2015, a source inside Theranos reached out to him with a tip. Something was wrong with the technology. Carreyrou spent months investigating. He spoke to former Theranos employees, all of whom were terrified of retaliation. Theranos had an army of lawyers and private investigators who monitored and intimidated anyone who questioned the company. In October 2015, the Wall Street Journal published Carreyrou's investigation. The headline, "A Prized Startup's Struggles." The story said, Theranos was not using its own device for the vast majority of its tests. Theranos denied everything. Holmes went on CNBC and called the story factually and scientifically wrong. But the questions kept coming. The FDA investigated. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services investigated. By 2016, the Edison device was banned. Theranos was banned from operating labs for at least 2 years. Holmes was banned from operating any laboratory for the same period. The $9 billion empire began to collapse. In June 2018, Holmes was indicted on federal fraud charges. The trial began in August 2021 and lasted nearly 4 months. Holmes made a dramatic decision. She took the stand herself. She claimed she genuinely believed the technology would eventually work. She claimed her former partner, Sunny Balwani, had emotionally and psychologically abused her. The jury deliberated for 7 days. On January 3, 2022, Elizabeth Holmes was convicted on 4 counts of fraud. In November 2022, she was sentenced to 11 years and 3 months in federal prison. She was ordered to pay $452 million in restitution. But here is where the story takes a familiar turn. In February 2025, her conviction was upheld on appeal. In December 2025, Holmes began campaigning for a presidential pardon from Donald Trump. In January 2026, she formally asked Trump to commute her sentence. In March 2026, a judge reduced her sentence by 12 months, citing revised federal sentencing guidelines. She now expects to be released sometime in 2026 or early 2027. And in a 2025 interview from prison, Elizabeth Holmes said she still intends to revolutionize the medical testing industry. The $9 billion lie, and she is still selling it. Bernie Madoff, Sam Bankman-Fried, Ross Ulbricht, Jordan Belfort, Jeffrey Epstein, Elizabeth Holmes. 6 different people, 6 different crimes, 6 different worlds. Wall Street, crypto, dark web, Silicon Valley. And the same story every time. Someone decided the rules didn't apply to them. Someone got away with it for years. And ordinary people paid the price. The patients who got wrong diagnoses from Theranos, they never made the cover of a magazine. But Elizabeth Holmes did. That is the world we live in. This is dark money and power. The truth they don't want you to know.